I understand. Thank you for telling me that it's being live streamed. All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. It is Phil Nagy and Kit Nagy on Sports. Excited to bring this one here to you today as we are going to break down week one of the preseason here. Of course, we only get 3 weeks this season. So Kit Nagy and Phil Nagy joining you. Good to see all your smiling faces. We're going to do this one live, so we'll get to interact. Tilted's already on, and all he says is "JOK" with 5 exclamation points. So I think that's I promise we're going to get there, Tilted. It was a heck of a debut for him for the third stringer, right?
That's right. No, we can't not talk about JOK with this preseason game. I mean, he was all over the place. So yeah, I'll definitely talk about him.
For sure he was. So anyway, we're obviously super pumped about it. Enjoyed it. It was great to just have football again, even if it didn't count. But in some ways, it means a whole lot especially for a certain percentage of the roster. So just to try to organize our thoughts a little bit, Kit and I are going to start on the offensive side of the football, just kind of overall schematically, things that we noticed. We'll talk about individual players here in a little bit. So Kit, what were kind of your first impressions of year two of the Kevin Stefanski offense, at least the version of it he showed yesterday?
Right. Well, very, very much in line schematically with kind of what you expect. Pretty vanilla. A lot of, I don't think he really wants to tip his hand, which is kind of what went into that one. So we saw a lot of very basic, fundamental, Stefanski offense plays in this one. A lot of play action, a lot of that wide zone, a lot of the zone blocking technique, the marriage of the run and pass, just like we talked about. And not a lot of variation outside of that. Not a lot of, obviously we didn't see any trick plays. We didn't see any wide receivers throwing passes or other things that we could have seen. Even though he wanted to say the name wrong over and over again for the Jags broadcast, Stanton was a quarterback back in the day. So, they could have done that kind of stuff. But no, so they kept it very basic, very vanilla, and true to form, and I think that's good. They want to make sure they've got lots of reps on the fundamentals, that they're really executing that at a high level, and because that's the core and really the base of this offense and what we should expect. So kind of true to form, we saw much of that, and I think that's exactly what you want to see as a Browns fan, because you want to make sure that's being executed at a high level. The coaching staff made sure of that and brought everybody together. And that's exactly what we saw out there, was very high level execution of the core of this playbook.
Yeah, for sure. I had the benefit of watching the local broadcast team because they gave it to us here in Columbus. So it was Joe Thomas on the color, but he was great.
I'm sure. I missed it.
He was very Romo-esque. He'd be like, "Oh, this looks like a slant to Switzer." Boom, touchdown, Switzer. It was like, "Oh, okay, all right."
I'm sad I missed it. Sadly, I could not get access to that. I had to go through NFL Game Pass. Is the only way I could get this, and unfortunately, that meant I had to listen to the terrible Jags call. Not that it was as bad as some of the others that I watched. Woof! Some of those were bad, sure. But this one was not the best. When the play-by-play kept calling, and I know he's way deep, second string fullback, but to not even check the fact that you've gotten his name wrong about 30 times now in the broadcast.
What were they actually calling him?
Trying to remember. It was like Slater or something, or
not even close.
Something way off. Yeah.
Anyway, but no, to that
Staley,
point,
that's what it was. It was Staley. He kept calling him Staley. Yeah, Staley instead of Stanton. And I'm just like, come on. At least somebody in the broadcast should point it to his attention. Like, his actual name is Stanton.
Especially with how much that they used him at the end, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, the reason I brought it up is because Joe Thomas kind of made the comment, and I guess it took me a minute to think back to last year. in terms of what they did, but it really, and it was funny. I was thinking about Dino the whole time because they really were intentional with the screen
They
game, and it
were.
was it was productive for them.
It
And
was.
Joe Thomas, at least on our broadcast, like I said, mentioned the fact that they didn't feel like they ran the screen game very effectively last year. It wasn't really a threat in the offense.
Right, not
Um,
until late in the season, really. They
yeah,
started to feature it a little bit more late. We saw that really, really good screen from Chubb to really seal the Pittsburgh game. That where he just busts the two defenders there. That was a screen. But I mean, they've had they started to later in the season, but again, it was a late install overall across the entire season. Really, they didn't get a lot of their
sure.
offense fully installed until after the bye.
Yeah. So I just thought it was interesting where they were very intentional about like, here's our bread and butter things. Oh, and we're going to throw to the running backs a lot.
Right.
And part of that, and again, when we talk about individual players, was the emergence of Felton and kind of all of the
Yes.
kinds of ideas that it appears that they have for him, which was great to see. So, yeah, overall, I thought it was fine. I did think it was interesting, and I can't take full credit for it. It was some other Browns person on Twitter that I follow had said, and I didn't even really think about it until afterwards, but this team could, and again, well, this is a God forbid situation, but if you had to roll with Case Keenum in this offense, and especially with the full complement of starters in their offensive line and Chubb and Hunt, like I think we'd be okay.
Oh
Certainly
yeah.
certainly for a stretch of the season, I thought he was fine. I thought he had really good command of the like. He's kind of the definition of game manager who just knows your playbook super well,
Mm-hmm.
knows where the read is going to likely be, and make the smart choices. And I know today there's some, and this was a comment that Tilted put on in our chat here, that the message boards are all raving about Lauletta and is he going to beat out Case Keenum and all this
No.
stuff. And
No.
I was like, yeah, I think that's what you want your third quarterback to be, is
Yeah.
somebody who's going to come in and do some things. But yeah, I don't think that you're going to cut Case Keenum because you
No.
got Kyle Lauletta back there.
No, no, but I will tell you what Lauletta is doing for himself. He may not be on the practice squad for this team because he showed out so well here, and if he continues to do that, somebody might very well snatch him up.
Yeah.
And much like Gilbert, now the backup in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very possible that if they continue to develop him and he continues to look good like that, you can see him elsewhere. No, but he's not going to replace Keenum. I just don't see that, especially with what you're paying Keenum.
For sure. Now, just finishing up with the offense, it did appear that there was a more concerted effort, whether it was Janovich or Stanton, to get the fullback involved. And again, I don't know if that was just a preseason thing or if that's just another wrinkle of things that we're going to see. But you start to get to that where it's like, man, there really are so many options. It's kind of like, who do I want to attack you with right now? But it was, I know, I was just picturing you sitting at your house chuckling and smiling every time.
Oh yes,
you had some fullback love.
And lots of it. I was loving it.
And I didn't realize that about Stanton until, again, our broadcast team told us that he played quarterback at UNLV. And then Joe Thomas was like, who knows? Maybe if Stanton makes the team, we'll get a little like option and he'll throw it. And, who knows? But
quarterback, tight end, and then fullback. And in fact, watching his hands, he had some really nice catches out there.
Yes, he did.
One in particular where he really snatched it out of the air and really showed positive control of the ball. That's a full-on receiver skill that many fullbacks won't have.
Sure. And again, I don't foresee a situation where Stanton makes the 53,
No.
but maybe you can park him on the practice squad, and then if there's an injury to Janovich or something, it's kind of a nice extra toy to have for a team that's got a lot of toys. And I think, we'll do some other videos later when we start to get through cuts and stuff. But really, for probably the first time, probably since they came back, right, in '99, like other teams are going to be very, very aggressively going after players that the Browns cut. Like you start to go through and you're like, how does he make defensive tackle cuts? How does he make linebacker cuts? Like I don't know what
wide receivers.
I don't know what they're gonna do. And again, we'll talk about that another day. But yeah, even from now, like I think they've got to go. They got to cut 5 guys already this week, and you're just like, in previous years, it was like, oh God, great, we finally get rid of some of these. But it's like everybody on the team is. That's obviously Andrew Berry first and foremost, but that's the culture, that's Stefanski, that's the coaching staff, that's the time on task, the work philosophy, all of those things that he's about. where you're just like, dang. And again, I know we'll spoil it early, but it's like I never even heard of Davion Davis until Saturday. And I was like, this dude looks like he's been at the Jarvis Landry School of Route Running. Like, I mean, he was and catching and so it's just like, kudos to Chad O'Shea, kudos to everyone. I mean, so it's just kind of like, it's nice to see that, like, and as you had pointed out when you and I were texting about it, it was really a good display of like the depth that we had. Like,
oh yeah,
we rolled with Dunn and Hance and you're telling me the Steelers wouldn't kill for that offensive line that we played.
Oh yes,
all backup offensive line.
That's right. Our second string offensive line in completion, complete second stringers all in there, and they're out there playing against a bunch of ones. Now, granted, take with a grain of salt, that is Jacksonville. They are low on the totem pole for competitive teams right now, but there were a lot of starters for Jacksonville and very few for the Browns across the board. But especially that O line, and look at the comparison of a bunch of starting O linemen that were getting beat by second string, D tackles, DNs for a number of sacks. We haven't gotten to the defense yet, but flip that in reverse, and our O line, second string, going up against a number of ones, and they're holding their own.
Yeah, I think
absolutely holding their own.
I think the sack was like third or fourth quarter, like very, very late in the game. The sack came, their one and only sack. So.
Yep, and their biggest challenge was run blocking. That was really where they were struggling. They weren't getting a lot of the holes open. But then again, I mean, we didn't have starting running backs back there either, and they weren't really because even with the minimal holes that were open in that game, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are still going to find a way to get a bunch of extra yardage.
Yeah, I thought in general that. It felt like the majority of the handoffs went to John Kelly, and he felt really slow and indecisive to get to the hole, which you would not have with Nick and Kareem in there for sure.
No.
Even if you had for some reason to roll with that second string offensive line. So
right.
But so that was those sacks is a good transition. Let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. Joe Woods 2.0. He's finally got some more pieces. He gets to run a little bit more of, I think. And again, he's certainly not going to show all of his tricks.
No.
I think that's probably a pretty safe bet that comes from the top, even with the analytics crew. Like, let's not show anything, right? But it's clearly running some more of their base stuff. So let's talk kind of what you saw from the defense overall.
Quite a bit more base package than I think we'll expect to see in the regular season with 2 and 3 linebackers out there. Saw quite a bit of Taki and that Sam position out there. But keep in mind how many linebackers they have available right now versus how many safeties they've got available. They do have some extra corners they could throw into the solution, and they did. But really the safety room right now, because of mostly soft tissue injuries, really thin. You got an ankle for Redwine, you got some hammies going on, Del Pitt, Harrison, and of course you're not going to play JJ3. He's way too valuable to be throwing him out there. But he doesn't need the reps, game reps to be. He's done more than enough. Sure. So really you've got Moffitt, you've got Benton, and you've got LeCount, and that is your entire safety room for the entire game. There's no rotation. So you had to sparingly use those guys. So we saw quite a bit more base. However, we did see a number of things that were interesting, really an attempt to play a little bit more to their strengths now that they have that speed. And man, was that speed apparent. We're going to get to JOK, obviously, individually, and his closing speed, as we saw multiple times. But just the speed in general across this defense was really readily apparent. A very interesting battle between Greedy and Newsome going on, filling in those primary outside cornerbacks, but their speed was definitely apparent out on the outsides. You had your, LeCount was all over the field, JOK, of course. But they really played to that speed in a number of places, bringing in some interesting blitzes that we didn't see a lot of, and things that you really can't afford to do with a team that is lacking in speed, because either the guys that are in solo man coverage are going to get burned because they're not fast enough, or that deep safety is going to get burned, like we saw quite a bit last year with Sendejo, just who clearly had lost a step. But if you have that speed kind of across the defense, even with your second string, third string guys, now suddenly it opens up a little bit more of your schematically what you can try to do, and a few more blitzes here and there, bring in an extra linebacker, bring in a safety, bring in a corner on that blitz, and we saw that be very productive for this defense and the scheme out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the benefit of having Zagura and Thomas and the other guy who's doing the play-by-play, I can't remember his name. But they were talking about Joe Thomas talking about Joe Woods didn't really blitz a lot last year because he couldn't afford to.
No, couldn't.
He didn't have the coverage behind it to be able to do that. And so Evie said, even in the preseason, it feels like we saw more blitzes yesterday than we saw, in terms of kind of per capita.
Oh yeah,
we saw in most of the games last year, and so that was kind of fun to see, and from various spots, and even when they weren't blitzing, like it was great to see Joe Jackson and Malvo, and like for the most part, the second team. I mean, obviously the second team DNs still be pretty effective. Porter Gustin with the sack as well.
Yep.
I would say kind of the only negative thing I saw from the defense is I thought Billings got pushed around a lot. I was kind of expecting some things from him, and I'm not going to overreact to one game, but
right.
And I know he was going up against Andrew Norwell, who's one of the top guards in the league. I think he was the highest paid guard up until Thuney this year or whatever, but was kind of like, isn't he supposed to be like the big guy who nobody can push around? But he kind of got moved around a lot in the middle. So again, not that I think he's going to get cut or anything, but that kind of visually was like, he's getting moved around a lot.
Yeah, he was off of his spot, which is a little bit concerning especially for his run defense, which I think is really what he was brought in to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was rather impressed with his pass rush. He was actually collapsing the pocket pretty effectively at times, and some of those sacks had a lot to do with Billings pushing up the middle and collapsing the pocket so that the ends could get around, or the linebacker coming in on a blitz like we saw with JOK.
Okay, all right. Like I said, I'm certainly not going to overreact after a couple of plays, but yeah, there was a few of those running plays where I was like, he's just getting blown up and pushed off the ball for sure.
Yeah, we could certainly talk about the who's up and who's down in terms of roster spots and some of the ones that after this initial reaction who might be a little bit closer to that bleeding edge of the bubble cuts.
Yes, and again I didn't. I guess I didn't really notice him. There was one play where Greedy kind of chased down that long. Was it the punt return or something? Maybe he actually kind of chased the guy down on the long punt return that got called back.
Yes, he did.
For the most part, they didn't call his name at all, which I suppose is a good thing in this case. I don't know how many defensive snaps he actually even played, and Newsom was only in there for a little bit too, but
right, not a ton. He did get targeted in some spots, and his coverage was generally pretty good. I was pretty happy with what Greedy was doing out there, partially because the balls weren't going his way. That's always a good sign for an outside corner, especially when you're on an island and that kind of that sticky man. So he was some pretty good coverage in a lot of spots. Really only one play on defense that I felt like he was kind of out of position. He got his hips flipped the wrong direction in coverage once, but stuff that's easily cleaned up. And you could see his effort out there. He clearly wants to win the job, and he's working hard towards it. And I think he's certainly got a good shot at being that corner this year.
For sure. Meant to do it a little bit earlier. I forgot. We want to welcome in John, Wendell, Rick, Tilted, all hopping in on the chat. Appreciate you guys. And yes, we'll talk about individual players here coming up. Also, this is the dual practice week, right?
They're
joint practice weeks.
Right.
I think they were talking about like you'll probably see the most starters in those, probably even less than will play even against, I don't know. We'll see how many they choose to play versus New York. So
right. No, I expect that to be ones against ones predominantly. You'll see quite a bit of it there, and not open to the public. So obviously the best way to see those is going to be Browns Live. So check that out with Nathan Zagura and Ken Carmen are going to be bringing those, but should be very exciting to watch and see a little bit of action. And realistically, in terms of value for especially the first unit, not just like who's going to make the team, but like value in terms of getting quality reps that really matter in practice, those joint practices with New York are going to be really the ticket.
For sure, for sure. All right, so let's talk about some. We'll flip back to the offensive side now. Let's talk about some individual performances that really stood out. I think it'd be hard pressed to not start with anybody other than Demetric Felton. He was all over the field and really looks like kind of Eric Metcalf 2.0 out there in some ways.
A little Darren Sproles, a little,
exactly.
That shifty kind of jump cut kind of running back. I love the fact he's wearing 25, because 25 to me is kind of the quintessential, jump cut running back as it is.
That's right.
Which, by the way, was my first ever number that I ever wore was 25. So I happen to have an affinity to that number anyway. But 25 was great out there. He really, obviously they were playing him strictly as a wide receiver. I think they just went into it with the game plan of, all right, you're in the wide receiver room for this day, which they've been doing in practice anyway. They really haven't, although they've moved him around practice to practice, it hasn't been intra-practice so much. Sure. Internal to practices where he's been moving around. It's just focused on the one room for the day and then move on to another room another day kind of thing. First of all, I want to mention him in special teams. He was kind of all over the place in special teams. Some nice returns that he got, even though he didn't get a ton of yardage, but making some guys miss, and not just one, which was impressive on that one that he brought back for about 6 or 7 yards. And then definitely that gunner position, getting down there in a hurry and doing some good things in coverage as well. So definitely like seeing that. Obviously that's going to hugely ramp up his value. And then the other thing in this, obviously very, very good hands, and good after the catch, as a running back should be. But he really has the skill set and runs really, really clean routes, which you saw the evidence of that in this one, where he was going up against, corners. He was going up against slot corners. He was going up against outside corners. He was lining up on the outside in the slot and really he was pretty much all over the field, playing all the positions, and really flashed in all of them. And really, he went up against, some starters and still was able to be productive, and, catch the ball and contest catches and everything you want to see from him. So really quite impressed with what he was doing out there. And don't think, that's another thing I want to talk about here, is don't think that it's somehow, D'Ernest Johnson or Felton. It's not an either or in this in this conversation, because of a couple of things. First of all, in terms of who you want to be really your step-in guy for Hunt or Chubb if they go down, D'Ernest Johnson, in my opinion, and especially with what we saw again in this game, and has continued through this preseason. He's the guy. He's the guy you want to be that third string running back. Take nothing away from Felton. We haven't seen him really at running back yet, but I don't think he's going to be at that level quite yet. He could be very, very good, don't get me wrong, but I don't think he's going to be at that level that D'Ernest has earned by now for really a quality third string running back who could be arguably a starter, on many rosters in the NFL potentially, or at least a second, that backup, kind of the part of a tandem, certainly.
Right.
So I thought he was really good, especially in the screen game. He was dangerous on that first screen that he hit, and then he just catching the ball out of the backfield looked really good. So very impressed with him. I don't think it's an either or with those two. In fact, I very much expect them to keep both. And then the reason why Felton is absolutely not getting cut, not only do you have value in, a pick that you put towards Felton, now granted a later round pick, but he's got pick value there. But the other piece of this too is just everything that he brings to this offense and to special teams and to the team in general. He brings so much. And it's the more you can do, kind of a discussion when it comes to the NFL for making rosters. That's why some of these special team wizards make teams, because they're playing 3, 4, 5 different special team units kind of thing, and just way too valuable to pass up on.
Yeah, in some ways and again, if we'll never really know if he was going to be good because of how early he got hurt, but in some ways, Felton's kind of like what they had hoped JoJo Natson would be.
Right.
And if you remember all those, last year when they were live broadcasting the preseason or the training camp practices and stuff, and how often they were throwing the little bubble screens and reverses, and like they had JoJo
Right.
Natson as I think he had a pretty important part of the offense originally.
Yes.
And they never got to see it, right? And then they didn't really have another body type to do that after he got hurt. And so all the things that we saw Felton do just yesterday were like, I think those were originally drawn up for 19, but Felton's body can take it a little bit more, and he's a little bit more adept at that skill set. And so,
and even where Felton,
he's probably the guy that gets cut because Felton stays.
Right.
So.
Well, and the other part of that is you've got draft capital also tied up in Schwartz, and for what Felton can't give you in speed, Schwartz absolutely will. Absolutely will.
I was thinking about that long third down conversion where they went play action and Bradley came all the way across.
Yeah.
And he had probably had his man beat by like 4 or 5 yards.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that play is for Schwartz.
Yep.
And he's just like, see ya. So I was just thinking like, oh man, Bradley's pretty quick, but they're all not going to be as quick as Schwartz. So
no.
Pretty wild. So who else on the offensive side of the ball kind of stuck out? We mentioned Davis. I know you were texting me about him. Where did this guy come from?
Yeah, so actually part of the reason why you don't recognize his name is because he's a recent addition to this team. He actually just recently got picked up. He was on the practice squad for the Vikings. Actually, that's how Stefanski and some of the members, the scouting, the talent team know about him is because he was with the Vikings for a while there, and so he actually brings. Some, obviously they liked him for a reason. And I think we got to see a lot of that on display. Excellent route running, obviously quick study because he picked up the offense quickly enough to be able to, now granted Stefanski was running that offense while he was there. So it shouldn't have been a huge, learning curve for him or anything, but still relatively quick study because he's only been around for a handful of practices at most. So able to get out there and show his stuff very, very quickly in what is becoming an incredibly deep, just insanely deep wide receiver room. And actually, speaking of guys that, you wouldn't have expected to be, roster casualties, I think we have to be worried about Hodge. I don't know that Hodge makes this team. We already talked about Natson a little bit. I think his stock is down, although he did have a nice return in this one. But Hodge, he had a couple of really off plays. He hasn't had the best training camp this year, although his last year was just absolutely steady. That's why he won the number 3 receiver last year with DPJ on the roster, with Higgins on the roster. And those guys are back and are, still positive trajectory, especially DPJ, which we haven't gotten to him yet. We certainly should. But Hodge is at best steady, and if kind of more realistically, kind of taking a step back. And with as deep as this roster is, I'm worried for him that he doesn't make it, which is going to be a hugely valuable pickup for somebody, especially in terms of as a special teams ace. That guy is one of the best in the business.
Yep, for sure. So yeah, people are mentioning in the chat. Continuing the camp hype that we've heard about for sure. Donovan Peoples-Jones, he just looks like he could be wide receiver 1 someday in the not too distant future.
Play one of the game, Keenum to DPJ. I mean, that's like it was like so you saw it coming all day long. You knew with the way his training camp has been proceeding that's how it was going to go. He just has an ability. He runs really technical routes, which is part of why he's been so successful. But his ability to really, even in tight coverage, still manage to create that space in the route where he can get his hands on the ball and the defender cannot. That little bit of the body shielding, a little bit of the body positioning to run it in a way that he can get himself. A lane that the quarterback can put it in, and he can come away with that catch. And sure hands, very, very technical. Obviously worked really hard. If you watch the Building the Browns and Chad O'Shea talking about how hard he worked in the offseason, how happy he is about, the effort that's been put in there. I mean, the guy works. He's like the Nick Chubb of the wide receiver room outside of maybe Jarvis Landry, and OBJ obviously works really hard too. That's really, true to form for that room in general, and working for a guy that's got multiple Super Bowl rings to show for it, and that expects that work. There's a reason why those guys are working that hard, and you saw the results of it. As DPJ out there doing his best little OBJ, really a Landry type catch, that one-handed twist in the air body control catch that was just unbelievable. Not the best throw ever, but kind of in a position where DPJ had to adjust to it, and that adjustment was just sick. That's hard to do. That's really hard to do, and just the way he's able to do that so quickly, come away with the ball one-handed and secure it for the catch, just a thing of beauty.
Yeah, for sure. Growing into that 6'2", 200-pound frame, he's really the only receiver on the roster with that body type. Everybody else is kind of in that 5'10", 5'11", 6 feet maybe, which is fine. But yeah, to have somebody, especially with the tight ends that we have. But yeah,
I think Schwartz is the closest.
People on the chat talking about him being a really effective red zone weapon.
And I think he will be. I very much think he will be
too. All right. Anybody else on offense that kind of flashed for you worth mentioning here?
So there's obviously, I think that you can't say enough about the O-line and what they were doing out there. Really, really impressive. I think Greg Sanat was really impressive out there, especially in his run blocking. In a day of not the best run blocking, he earns a 90. Over a 90 for his run blocking grade from PFF. That's impressive. And you saw him, he's a bit of a mountain of a man, but he was moving guys. There's a reason why Dallas had picked him up off of our practice squad last year. But he's making a case to make this roster. I mean, he really played well. And obviously he's in competition with some other very good players out there. But we'll see what happens with him. He's obviously going to be very talented, and somebody's going to love having him on their roster if we don't end up keeping him. But we have to talk a little bit more about Davis in terms of what he was doing, because a guy that, like I said, hadn't heard much of. But you wonder, you expect probably that 6 wide receiver, plus you've got Felton, you can't get rid of him. You wonder, is he going to even make this roster? But man, did he make a case in that effort to make this highly talented wide receiver room, which was downright impressive. And I don't know that he does, but man, was that a good showing out there, especially that touchdown. I mean, just mossed the guy right over top, comes down with the ball. I mean, it was just,
acrobatic footwork to get the foot in, and then presence of mind to get your butt in rather than fall the other direction out of bounds.
It was a thing of beauty, and really, really impressive from him. And gotta love what we saw pretty much around the board for this offense. In a very vanilla bread and butter type scheme, still finding ways to be productive. And I think the most impressive thing in terms of going kind of just in general for the offense was just really, exerting their will in terms of a clock control. That 20 play drive that they go down with the third string offense effectively all out there. And they're on a 20 play drive that chews up 10 minutes of clock. I mean, are you kidding me? That's insane. And that's just, they just utterly sucked all of the air out of the game for the Jaguars on that drive. And it was done with, third stringers, which again, speaking of depth, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, absolutely it was. So I put on the in the chat if there's anybody on the other offensive guys they wanted us to talk about. Wendell said the right tackle and the right guard, and I'm trying to talk about if he wants to hear about Dunn and Hubbard or Gossett and Sanat. You already mentioned Sanat a little bit, so talk about what you saw from Michael Dunn and Chris Hubbard and their kind of the first string right side of the line.
Yeah, no, Dunn was true to form, really the best lineman out there on the day for the Browns. he was great. He was good, especially in pass blocking sets. He was excellent. His run blocking was pretty decent. Not quite as good as his pass blocking, but if you're going to take one over the other, you certainly want the protection for Baker Mayfield and or Case Keenum out there. You want that protection for your quarterback first. And then trust your running backs to make a guy miss or find, squeeze through a tiny gap or, break tackles. That's what you have with Chubb. That's what you have with Hunt. So I'd much rather have the guys that are consistently pass blocking and not allowing pressure. So very happy, very happy with what he was doing out there. And then to talk about Hubbard, true swing tackle. And he was true to form. He's just such a veteran at this point. Have to love what they did to restructure that deal to have him on this roster. But he's just true to form, going to work for every rep and work hard and really played well as also.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to speak a little bit. Rick calls him Michael Gitter Dunn. That's right. Absolutely.
That's right.
Pretty wild. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people on Twitter too talking about just how kind of underratedly good that Michael Dunn is, and what a luxury to have. And the only time you're going to see him is if Batonio, Treader, or Teller get nicked, So, but in terms of like your first interior guy off the bench, man, what a luxury to have.
Well, and that's what we saw last year with going into postseason. I mean, we were down to Dunn and a guy named Blake and performed admirably at short notice. And, they've only had more time and more opportunity to work with the legend Bill Callahan and his very technical approach to teaching O-linemen how to be the best they can. And man, the results are paying off. You can see it easily in this game for both Hance and Dunn. They were both excellent, effectively starters in this game. Even though they're not first stringers, they both started and they both played like starters in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we flip over to the defensive side, because I know people want us to talk about JOK, and rightfully so. What were your initial thoughts on James Hudson, starting left tackle right away? We know he's got all the athleticism, still kind of transitioning into that position. Remember, he was recruited out of high school to Michigan as a defensive lineman, and then went to Cincinnati and made the flip. What were your first thoughts? I know he had a false start penalty or something.
Right.
What were your thoughts other than that about Hudson's first performance?
Well, we'll start with that because I think that's going to be the first thing the coaches are going to work to clean up with him. Obviously you can't have those pre-snap penalties. Those are, that negated a first down and from a 3rd and short made it into a 3rd and 7 or 3rd and 8, something like that. And that's not where you want to be. That's certainly, especially if that's a 4th down attempt and now you're at 4th and 7, you can't even go for it, or likely not going to go for it anymore. That potentially can swing a game if you were to have picked up that 4th down and instead now we're going to have to punt. That has the potential to swing a game, right? So those are super critical, and that's going to be something that this coaching staff will make sure to clean up with him. It's a rookie mistake, but hey, we didn't have very many of those in general. So that one actually stands out. Just a couple of the one special teams penalty that we saw for an unfortunate block and what was a nice return. But hey, I guess what I'd say outside of that one penalty, he did look pretty good. Obviously he's a very mobile guy who was out there leading some charges out on those wide receiver the running back screens and stuff. So definitely able to get out there in front, leverage his body in the right position. I thought he played with pretty good technique out there. Some errors that we saw, but wasn't glaring, and I thought he was certainly serviceable for the most part, and I liked what I saw out of him on special teams too.
Yep, for sure. It certainly didn't look like the game was too big for him.
No,
by any stretch. So, all right, well, let's flip over to the other side of the ball as now the other dog has entered the Zoom call here. But let's talk about the defense. People that stuck out. Obviously, everybody wants to talk about it. Let's start right with him. The Joker, fresh off the COVID list. He looks every bit as advertised. The theft of the second round pick in full effect. He looked fast. He just blew that. He shed the block and blew that one screen pass up, the sack. He was just all over the field. What were your first thoughts seeing 28 out there?
Oh man. We absolutely saw, lots of glimpses into why he was considered a first-round draft pick, and that closing speed in particular, his ability to come clean off of blocks, just so slippery and just so explosive, that step. And I've got a lot of really good things to say about JOK, and I'm going to continue that. But first, I should mention he wasn't even the best defender out there. He wasn't even the best rookie out there. In fact, the best rookie out there was LeCount, and we'll definitely need to talk about him and why he was so good. But in general, it's not so much because of because JOK was special at times. And I don't mean that his peaks of his flashes weren't higher than LeCount's. They were. It's just that there were some mistakes too. It's obvious that he had missed some time and some things that, you watch his presser and obviously the media has no idea what they're talking about. So they were like, you looked great. Clearly you made no mistakes. And he's like, no, I made plenty of mistakes and things that won't be so apparent to you. But I'll tell you, I caught on to a few of them that I think he wants to clean up and some things that he should get better. So let's talk a little bit about that side of it first. So things that I think he wants to clean up out of this one. First of all, he's telegraphing his blitzes too much. You can tell when he's coming. He wants to kind of, he wants to, that kind of the Troy Polamalu, like jump the line kind of thing where he's already across the line, like practically when the ball is snapped, without, getting that penalty flag. But there were a few times where it was quite clear that he was coming, where he was trying to anticipate snap counts and stuff. And that's something that he can work on, that he'll get better at. But really there was only, I think, one blitz out of, he probably had 5 or 6. But there was probably only one blitz where he successfully camouflaged that, and he can be much better than that. Sure. So because it'll be way more dangerous if he's not telegraphing the fact that he's coming. Because and he's got the explosive speed, even from, back there 2-3 yards off of the line. He's got so much closing speed that it's really not going to matter, even if he's like taking off the moment, from back there. He can still close so quickly that he'll be in the backfield before the running back can get there because of it. So I think he's actually going to be better served when he starts to figure out a little bit more of that timing and not telegraphing the blitz quite as much. So that's one thing that I think that he wants to clean up. There was one play in particular where I saw he took a bit of an over pursuit, shot a gap, and ended up having to pursue from behind the play. He still got involved in the tackle because of his crazy closing speed, but realistically, he should have had the guy blown up, for a TFL, and instead it ends up being a 4-yard roughly gain that, JOK has to then turn around and catch back up to be involved in. And it was really because he over pursued, initially shot the wrong gap. And then when he got to that, past the running back, then he has to correct and get back involved in the play. And the other spot where I think there was an obvious mistake was he was pretty soundly beaten on that little quick out route, quick release out route off of the one time he was lined up out in the slot, lined up directly on the slot receiver, and he gets the release for the receiver was a clear win for the receiver out to the boundary. But JOK, even with 3 steps behind, flashes again his closing speed and is making a tackle for basically no gain. Now, predominantly that's because of the quarterback, not because of the receiver. The receiver wins the route off the line. If the quarterback releases that ball like right now, instead of waiting a tick or two, giving JOK time to close, then, then he's got the edge, and JOK doesn't make the play unless he's got a pursuit angle that works. He probably catches him for, 8-yard gain, I'd guess, in that case, or somewhere in that range. But instead he gets him for 0, primarily because the quarterback delayed the throw. But still that closing speed, it makes all the difference, because he was several steps behind,
He still chased down a receiver without any issues. Yeah.
Right. But you want to see him work on that the jam at the line, and come away with more of a win against the receiver, because those guys are going to be shifty, and finding a way to jam them up at the line a little bit more effectively that's going to be important if they're going to put him out there in that basically slot corner role, which is what he was playing, or kind of the big nickel safety role, which is really what he's playing out there. So
for sure. No, it was great to see him. And again, PFF had him at a 78.1 for the game, third highest on the team. He played 47 snaps. So I think it was a great opportunity for him to get that. I mean, again, dude's still shaking off some rust. He's missed a lot of the physical reps. They said he was extra. I mean, they say he is obviously, any Andrew Berry draft pick is going to be an intelligent football player. They said the rookies are so good at the translating it from the film room to the practice fields, and because they draft those guys on purpose. They talked about Joe Thomas was really highly spoken about Greg Newsome, and they were like he's never made the same mistake twice. Like he's like, okay, like they're so cerebral, and he's getting really good with his eyes and stuff. It's just like, man, just wild to think about that kind of next level. Like, and they're also really fast and can tackle, and like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It really is pretty wild. So let's talk about. Are you done with JOK? You want to go to account? Okay.
A few more things to talk to on JOK. Real quick on JOK though. First thing I would say about him and where he was drafted. Don't forget, if Newsome wasn't there, JOK is the pick.
Yeah, I mean, take him at
26. He is absolutely the pick at 26. There is no question. They were very high on him, and to get him at 52 is huge deal. And we saw that. For sure saw that, like that first round talent and everything about him being undersized, and can he take on a block? None of it matters. His closing speed is so good. He's obviously very sure at tackling. My goodness, his tackles were solid out there. And he was involved. I think he was involved in 8 or 9 tackles out there, which is, for a game is a good number anyway. But he didn't even play a full game. No, he played about roughly 3/4, but still he still 8 or 9 tackles is a very good day in that time frame. Not to mention has a sack, has 3 TFLs, and nearly blocks a kick. So he's involved in all 3 phases, in both phases, very obviously involved, and really making his presence felt throughout. And man, did he flash in a big way. Now, LeCount was more steady and high quality throughout his play, and less from the mistake side. That's why he got the much better PFF rating. But in terms of the upside and seeing how great that JOK can be, I mean, we're talking, this guy has the potential to play like, I mean, I don't want to blow this too far out of proportion, but that Palomalu reference that I made earlier, he could look like a guy like that, because he's got that closing speed, and he could be a monster in a defense where he just is played all over the field. Size doesn't matter. He's got the coverage skills, clearly. He's got the blitzing skills, clearly. He's got the tackling skills, clearly. He can come off of blocks. He's doing it all, and his closing speed is unparalleled. And, that to me is a guy that you can definitely, once you fully groom him, into the savvy veteran that he's going to be. I mean, we're talking his ceiling is unbelievable.
Absolutely. All right, Mr. 90, Mr. Elite, is that elite level?
That is
right?
elite.
90 and above.
Yes, that is
90.4 for the count.
Yeah. So wow, talk about downright impressive. What a adulation to get that on your very first action in the NFL even if it is a preseason game. That's high praise from PFF, and realistically, he earned it. He was all over the field. His speed, which by the way, don't forget, the reason he drops in that draft is because of the injury that he had sustained in his combine. Not that there was a true combine, but his quote unquote combine numbers weren't.
He was slow. Yes.
Yeah, he was slow, and that was the problem. Even though he played and was really a core critical piece of that Georgia defense, and was, the film he put out there was excellent. Really surprised that he had dropped as far as he did, with as good as his film was in an SEC school, playing some really, really good wide receivers out there. And it certainly wasn't for speed that he was, he certainly had speed out there, playing in the SEC. And because you have to, you have to. Yeah. So we saw that speed in a big, big way, almost probably should have come away with that early interception. But if you go back to that one that he almost comes away with, a little bit underthrown from, I think it was Minshew at that point, but just a little bit underthrown ball, not the best ball placement, which gave, LeCount the opportunity to come away with it. But look at where LeCount starts, where he is in relationship to when he realizes where the play is going, and he just has this crazy closing speed to get over there. And by the time he recognizes where the ball is and sees this coming up short, he's in a position to make a play, which for the distance he had to close to do it was just wild. So very, very impressive there. Same thing was true on that kind of Hail Mary pass, again, underthrown, but he came charging from way back to come up to get that one. Yes. So very impressive. I know it's a meaningless interception in terms of actual game, but in terms of how impressive it was for what he was doing, just crazy impressive. Also involved in the blitz game and comes away with a sack, and that was downright impressive on its own right. So he's not afraid to stick his nose in there, and he had some really solid tackles to this game, and just his coverage. He was the best safety out on the field, no question. And in terms of roster spots, who were we looking at? To me, he was playing better than we've ever seen Redwine play. In one game, he was playing at a higher level than we've ever seen Redwine play. Not that Redwine is bad by any means, but he makes mistakes with his eyes, where he'll be in poor positions and then not able to get back to the play, or misreads. And we saw none of that from LeCount. LeCount was in position throughout the game, and it was really, really well played. And so now suddenly, you're not so worried if Delpit isn't fully healthy by the time the season starts, because you feel like if LeCount can continue this, he might be the plug and play guy to replace a Delpit.
Yeah, they're definitely gonna use all of them. There were some funny comments on Twitter going around about, in one play, Richard LeCount was already better than Andrew Sendejo has ever been in a Cleveland Browns uniform. So
right now Sendejo, he had his age catching up to him. You got to give him some credit. He had some very good tape in the NFL prior to all of this.
I'm not piling on. I just thought it was funny. So.
But on the other hand, LeCount, yes, with the speed that was very evident out there, he could do things that Sendejo simply couldn't.
For sure. All right, well, who else on that defensive side of the ball flashed for you? Actually, between 1 and 3 PFF grades was A.J. Green.
Well, actually, that's exactly who I was going to bring up next, was A.J. Green. So A.J. Green, in terms of pure coverage, in terms of being in position in that sticky coverage, he was always in the right spot. He was really good, solid tackler, very, very impressive. He's not the fastest guy, but he makes up for it by just being really good with his hands, and really good with his body control and his body positioning in a route. And man, was he good. He had some pass breakups that were impressive, very nice tackling, really very impressive throughout his play. You have to like what he's doing. And he's a guy that, coming into this, you were wondering, does he make this roster? Because you hadn't seen him in a while. And with the way he was playing out there, and obviously he earned the fact being, essentially a starter in this game, at that kind of playing on the inside. And then on the outside, when they moved on from both Greedy and Newsome, but he obviously is a guy that you're excited to have in a backup role, and playing excellent coverage, and probably you have to think he probably has a good shot at making this roster.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Remember, he was kind of the Marvin Wilson of last
That's
year,
right.
the undrafted rookie that they paid an extra amount for. So and he,
Right.
for
Well,
the
and
most part,
that,
he was the practice squad for the majority of the
yeah,
season until the end of the year, and kind of surprised that we were able to keep him there.
right.
So I
Yeah.
think he's got some talent.
So was I, and ironically, it's almost failing now. Speaking of guys that may or may not make this roster, and Marvin Wilson, that he may not make this roster. That D tackle room is so very good,
Oh gosh,
and we saw quite a bit of that. That's a good segue
yeah.
into who we should talk about next. Is really our D tackles in general, because that competition is really exciting, and folks that you just are not sure how it's all gonna play out, because they're all so good, and that rotation is very deep, with losing both of our starters, and really only one guy in that whole room comes back in Jordan Elliott, and yet the effort that AB does to address that room was almost unparalleled. Really impressive. Yeah, no, Marvin Wilson, I'm not entirely convinced he makes this roster, and he was just like AJ Green. I suspect they'll try to put him on the practice squad. Who knows whether or not he'll survive that, like AJ Green managed to. But if he does, obviously you'd hope to develop him further in a later iteration of this team, in a later season kind of thing. If he does survive that. Obviously, the good news being he's got experience in this system, and if he doesn't make it somewhere else, he could come back, kind of like we saw with Sanat. No, AJ Green, I think, will probably make this roster. I'm not so convinced on Wilson. He was not. He did not really flash in a big way. Yeah. Excuse me, in this one. But the D tackles that did show up in this one, first of all, we have to talk about Day. Very first snap of the game for Lawrence. Welcome to the NFL. Here comes Day, a guy that most people didn't even recognize on this roster. Right. Because when I first did my first initial impressions of what were the 53, I counted Day out entirely, because he was a guy I knew of, but it's like, well, I haven't seen him, don't know what he's going to be. And I know what some of these other guys are going to be or could be. Day was great in there. And it's obvious why he's really earned that second team rotational piece position that he has now, because you're going to see him out there on Sundays with the way he was playing in there. And it wasn't just that first play, but let's talk about that first play really quick. That wasn't just a beats his man. He split a double team to do it, and those are starters that he manages to split the double team of, goes right between the two of them, and really very impressive to get to the quarterback very quickly from that D tackle position, and doing it at a high level, and very, very impressive out there. So I think he's got a very good chance to make this roster. Which we can talk about some of the others. Damian Square has made tons of rosters, but you wonder if he's even got a shot at making this one, just because of how deep it is at the D tackle room. And then Malik Mcdowell, I think that injury, his oblique injury, came for him at the worst possible time, because he can't show what he's got now. Until he's able to come back for that, if he's able to come back from that in time. And he's going to be very hard pressed to make this roster at this point. So obviously you have to think Togia is going to make it. He showed good stuff. Elliott obviously is going to make it. He had an excellent cleanup tackle to prevent that first down on their go forward on the fourth down. Yeah, the turnover on downs, which was absolutely huge. So Elliott was really good out there, and you like to see in the development that he had on the defense. And really very, very excited about that D tackle room in general, which many Browns fans came in going, oh no, the panic mode. What's this D tackle room going to be? And I know.
Yeah, we can still bring back Sheldon Richardson. It's like, why? Just so we can cut him? Yeah.
We don't need to. No. And in fact, I think our D tackle room, I'm not entirely convinced that Ogunjobi or Sheldon Richardson starts in this D tackle room right now. Maybe Richardson does, but I'm not entirely convinced those are our starters if we have all of these names in that room right now with the way these guys are playing.
Absolutely, yeah. And we'll do another video later. Obviously, guys are going to start to get cut and things like that. But anybody else on the defensive side? Otherwise, we'd probably tie a bow on this one here. Appreciate everybody on. B, welcome on. Karen, welcome on. Wendell, I think we already said hi.
No, I think that's probably the most of the folks I wanted to mention. There were pretty much all of our rookies flashed. I would say all of them flashed in their own way. They were all good. Obviously, wish we could have seen Schwartz out there. I'm sure he would have liked to have been out there also. But very happy with what we saw from our rookies. Obviously, I would have loved to see Delpit, but he wasn't able to get out there either. But But I think what you've got in Schwartz and and Delpit, so I don't think we're worried about what those guys are going to be for this team. And then the guys that needed to go out and compete and earn a roster spot, I think they did exactly that, and they're going to make it really hard on this front office and coaching staff to make those final decisions. It's going to be really hard choices, and it'll be that's what you like seeing. That's exactly what you want to see.
And the other player who we've been hearing about having a great camp on the defensive side of the ball was just the way that Mack Wilson has come back this season. Everybody's talking about him being a div, and he did go out with an injury. I just saw he's going to get an MRI on that shoulder. So maybe similarly to, in a different way, the McDowell, because a lot of people were predicting at the beginning, even before training camp started, that Wilson was an obvious, cut victim because of Anthony Walker or JOK or whatever.
Right.
And I think he had maybe played himself back into the mix. And so
he did.
Hopefully, for his sake, because of that hard work, you'd hate to see an injury derail
right.
that.
Well, and that would be very unfortunate. I think that would probably be, I would expect they would probably try to put him on the IR if it is something shows up negative in that MRI. Depending on length and when they'd expect him back. But on the other hand, with the way that JOK played out there today, I mean,
sure.
Phillips
just played well. Phillips looked good. He looked comfortable calling the plays. I didn't even see Walker didn't even play, did he?
No, Walker did not play. No, so it was Phillips. It was Phillips and Wilson from the get go, and then JOK came in. And then JOK came in later, But no, I think you'd be very comfortable having JOK be your day one starter at the will, and if Wilson's not able to go. But and that being said, you also have Malcolm Smith, that veteran, in that room that can very well play as an excellent backup to JOK, assuming he wins that role. Or you'd be very comfortable starting Malcolm Smith with the way he played for you last year.
Yeah. I know you're talking about guys like Smith, Taki, Wilson, like at least one of those, maybe two of those guys aren't going to make the 53,
Yeah. Now, if they IR Wilson, then obviously you're going to get to have one of those extra guys. I'm pretty comfortable that they're not going to give up on Taki. He's way too valuable in special teams, and we actually saw that quite a bit. He was one of the higher graded special teams players out there. He's excellent in special teams, as many linebackers tend to be. I think Elijah Lee is probably a guy that might get roster cut, and then Malcolm Smith. If Wilson stays, then Malcolm Smith's job may be on the line. But if not, then certainly I think they'd bring him back or keep him around because he'll be an excellent. Either can be a starter while JOK is finishing up the last of his grooming, or they'll start with JOK.
Yeah, be interesting to watch for sure for a couple of position groups that we felt so thin on last year. Now all of a sudden, I don't even know who we're going to keep. There's so many talented players there. So
yeah, it reminds me of Teller, honestly. Like, remember going into that training camp going, who's going to play right guard? And actually, speaking of guys that you're not sure are going to make this roster, I think we have to be concerned about Drew Forbes. He's a guy that, he was slated to be in a competition with Teller for that number one guard. And he really played with our third and or fourth string line out there, and not that he was bad, but, I don't know that he played well enough to make this team if it continues that way.
He's certainly not better than Michael Dunn and probably Blake Hance or Nick Harris. So now all of a sudden, practice squad might be the best thing he can hope for.
Right.
So cool. All right. Well, appreciate everybody being on with us. This was fun. And, Rick mentioning here one more comment. I think Lee stays just for special teams, and I don't disagree that he's not a quality special teamer. I just don't know if there's. I
don't think there's space. You're going to have to make your cuts. Yeah, you're going to have to make your cuts somewhere. And linebacker room tends to be a prime candidate for having special teamers. But with the way this is lining up. I mean, that's why guys like Matson, even though he could be a full-time special teams only return man, because he's got that kind of skill. I mean, and if you hope to work him into a wide receiver, but like your wide receiver room is so. I mean,
Yeah.
like how are you? It's going to be hard cutting Bradley. Bradley could be a great starter elsewhere. I mean, it's going to be hard cutting Davis, as we saw. I mean, he could easily be a starter elsewhere. I mean, you got. I mean, obviously Higgins, obviously TPJ, Hodge. I mean, all these guys, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, well, everybody, this was fun. We'll do more of it again, kind of our preview for the season. We always post-mortem each of the games, as well as some keys to the games leading up to it. You know that when they start making their cuts and getting down, we'll have videos about that as well. So appreciate all of our subscribers. You guys are the best. We will get more of our 2021 simming going maybe tonight. I don't know. I've got another gig. But definitely tomorrow we'll get something cooking here. But appreciate you guys being on. For Kit out on the left coast, Phil here in Central Ohio. We are Nagy on Sports. And we'll get out of here the way we always do by saying,
Go